The sound of wood cracking nearly stopped my heart. 1 second, I was standing proudly beside the bed I had built with my own hands, and the next, the entire frame tilted beneath us. My friend's mother grabbed my arm to steady herself, looked at me with the most unexpected smile, and said, "We should test it. Care to help?" I froze, completely misunderstanding what she meant. But what happened during the next few minutes would teach me something about kindness, loneliness, and the quiet ways people ask to be remembered. If stories about second chances and unexpected kindness touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. You never know whose life might be changed by a simple story. My name is Daniel, and I had known Marcus since college. We weren't the kind of friends who talked every day, but whenever life became difficult, we showed up for each other. Marcus worked long hours at a mechanic's shop, and I had spent years doing small carpentry jobs whenever I could find them. One rainy evening, Marcus called me sounding exhausted. His mother, Elena, had been sleeping on an old mattress because her bed frame had finally collapsed. She had been putting off buying a new one because she was struggling to cover her medical bills and household expenses. I remembered Elena as the woman who always made too much food whenever I visited Marcus. She had a way of making people feel welcome without asking questions about their problems. She had once told me that a person's worth wasn't measured by what they owned, but by how they treated people who could give them nothing in return. I never forgot those words. So I told Marcus not to worry about the bed. The next morning, I went to a lumberyard and bought sturdy wood with the little money I had saved. I spent nearly 3 days measuring, cutting, sanding, drilling, and rebuilding the design several times because I wanted the bed to be strong enough to last for decades. I could have bought something cheaper, but Elena had spent her entire life making other people comfortable. For once, I wanted someone to do the same for her. When I finally carried the finished frame into her bedroom, she stood silently in the doorway. The room was small, with faded curtains and an old photograph of Marcus as a child sitting beside her on a beach. Elena touched the polished wooden headboard with trembling fingers. She didn't say anything at first. Then tears rolled down her cheeks. I immediately felt embarrassed and asked if something was wrong. She shook her head and said nothing was wrong. She simply couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for her without expecting something in return. That sentence stayed with me. I helped place the mattress on the frame, tightened every bolt, and checked the joints twice. Elena watched carefully, almost amused by how seriously I was taking the job. When I finally stood up and announced that the bed was finished, she smiled and said we should test it. I assumed she meant I should push against the frame or sit on the edge. Instead, she climbed onto the mattress and told me to sit beside her so we could see whether it moved or creaked under weight. I laughed nervously, realizing how foolish my first interpretation had been. Elena laughed too, and for the first time that day, the sadness in her eyes disappeared. We bounced gently on the mattress like children testing an old trampoline. The frame held perfectly. Then came the crack. One of the wooden supports shifted, and the mattress tilted several inches. Elena grabbed my arm, and I caught her before she fell. We both stared at the damaged support in disbelief. Then, unexpectedly, Elena began laughing. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the kind of laughter that comes after someone has spent too long being serious. She laughed until tears filled her eyes, and soon I was laughing too. But when the laughter faded, she became quiet. She told me that the bed wasn't what had made her emotional. It was the fact that someone had noticed. For years, she had taken care of everyone around her. She had raised Marcus alone after his father left. She had worked 2 jobs, skipped meals when money was tight, and quietly paid for Marcus's school supplies. When Marcus became an adult, she told him she was fine because she didn't want him to feel guilty. But being strong for everyone had made her invisible. She admitted that sometimes she sat alone at night and wondered whether anyone would notice if she stopped pretending everything was okay. I didn't know what to say. So I simply sat beside her. Sometimes kindness doesn't require the perfect words. Sometimes it means staying when there is nothing impressive left to say. The next morning, I returned with new support beams. I replaced the damaged wood, reinforced the corners, and added extra brackets underneath the frame. Elena watched from the doorway with a cup of tea in her hands. When I finished, she walked over and placed her hand on my shoulder. She told me she had spent years believing that accepting help made her weak. Now she understood that sometimes allowing someone to help you gives them a chance to become part of your life. That evening, Marcus came home from work and saw the finished bed. He stood there for several seconds, speechless. Then he hugged me. He confessed that he had been carrying guilt for months because he couldn't afford to replace the bed himself. He thought he was failing his mother. I told him something Elena had taught me without realizing it: providing everything isn't the same as loving someone, and struggling to provide doesn't mean you've failed them. Weeks passed. The bed became more than a piece of furniture. Elena began sleeping better. She started sitting in her room with books she had abandoned years earlier. She planted flowers outside her window. She even began attending a small community center twice a week, where she helped elderly neighbors with groceries and paperwork. One afternoon, she called me and asked if I could come by. When I arrived, she showed me something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. Beside her new bed was a small wooden box. Inside were handwritten notes from people she had helped throughout her life. Marcus had found them in an old drawer and brought them to her. One note was from a former neighbor whose children Elena had fed during a difficult winter. Another was from a young woman Elena had encouraged to finish school. Another simply said, "You saved me when nobody else noticed." Elena looked at me and said she finally understood something. She had never been invisible. She had simply forgotten how many lives she had touched. That night, before I left, she smiled and joked that the bed had survived its official test and deserved a passing grade. We both laughed. But as I walked home, I realized the real test had never been about the bed. It had been about whether we would notice the people who quietly carried everyone else. And I wondered how many Elenas were sitting behind closed doors all over the world, pretending they were fine because they had become experts at hiding their pain. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. A small action from you can help these stories reach someone who desperately needs a reminder that they matter. Before we end, I want to ask you something special. Comment, "You are not invisible," if you believe everyone deserves to be noticed, valued, and loved. Because sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money, furniture, or a perfect solution. Sometimes, it's simply showing up. Sometimes, it's noticing the tired eyes behind the smile. Sometimes, it's reminding someone who spent their whole life caring for others that they deserve care too. And sometimes, a broken bed isn't really a broken bed. It's an invitation to rebuild something much more important, the feeling that somebody, somewhere, still cares.